Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dev Diary, where today we're continuing to work on our building action RAFT-like. Now, last time we focused on a resource collection system. This allowed us to, well, not only collect the resources floating around in the void space, but also document how much of said resources the players gathered. An attempt at a crafting system using said resources was also made. However, due to a lack of time and underestimating just how large of an undertaking a crafting system can be, we had to postpone progress. Which brings us to today's plan. We're continuing focus on the resource management and crafting. We'll not only cover the crafting system our RAFT-like will use, but we'll also focus on utilizing said system. We'll also continue working on gameplay elements revolving both the RAFT and void spaces. Sounds like a lot, so let's get to the coding. Now, in between videos, I actually developed a crafting system, so allow me to explain how it works. Inspired by an old video in which I attempted to recreate Minecraft's crafting system, this system also uses a single string to do the dirty work, and that string consists of alternating numbers. Odds referred to the resource type, and evens referred to the amount needed. The string is then fed into a function as an argument. In the function, it separates the string into usable data using commas as the dividers. This data is then used to check the player's resource collection for the resources and the amounts needed. If all checks out, the function then removes the necessary amount of resources from the player's collection, and finally the result is returned for extended use based on that result. I honestly didn't expect this system to work, hence why I didn't bother recording the process. It's a bit bloated and overkill, however it works for what we'll need moving forward, so let's keep moving forward. A new function was added that would act as our recipe book. Case 0 in the switch would refer to the workbench requiring 1 wood, and case 1 would be the stove which would require 1 stone. The corresponding string is then passed on to our new crafting function. Then if the function returns true, the build process is then triggered. The left click check was then updated to use these new functions in the build menu. And all of that hard and complicated work ended up paying off as the crafting system worked like a charm. The player could now place structures like before, but now at the cost of resources. And so now that collecting resources meant something, I wanted to start thinking of ways to prevent the player from venturing too far from their base. So in the player code, a couple variables were added for a tether system. A tether would then attach the player to the middle of the room/raft. The distance was then clamped and the player movement was then restricted, forcing them to remain within a certain distance of their raft. A distance check was then added, and if the player was too close to the max distance, a countdown would begin. Once the countdown reaches its limit, for now the player is simply teleported back to the middle of their raft/origin point. And finally, to help illustrate this danger, a red border was added that would begin to fade in as the danger counter would increase. And the results were interesting. The player could now venture a certain distance, hit the threshold, and eventually be teleported back to the base. It was good, it was solid, and I think it works great to keep the player nearby. However, it had its problems. But instead of getting too distracted, I took some time to think on it and work on something else. So a new structure was added that would make use of the triangle resource. And this would be a turret structure. So in the structure code, a cooldown system was added that would allow the turret to periodically shoot a projectile at any nearby enemies. A recipe requiring 1 triangle was then added to the crafting list, and, well, we now had buildable working turrets. They're quite simple in nature indeed, and honestly may be a bit too much for what we're going for, but the possibility of building structure-based defenses are now on the table, and also easy to implement if needed. So with turrets now a thing, I wanted to return to the tether system, specifically what to do with a raft that may be constantly growing in size. So 4 variables were added. These variables would measure the 4 edges of our raft, which would be recalculated every time the raft tiles are updated. These variables would then replace the old tether origin point code, so the new middle of the raft depends on the raft's overall size. It's hard to explain in words, so thankfully testing reflected exactly what I was after. Anytime the raft was resized beyond the original 4 tiles, the tether's origin point would be recalculated. And though the tether system seems somewhat off, that's simply due to snapping to the grid, and easily fixable with an offset. All things considered, this helps solve one of many issues I have in regards to using a tether system moving forward, and it's honestly something that'll require further brainstorming, which meant the end of today's session. So going forward, if we stick with the tether system, the distance of the tether may also need to be made more dynamic. or certain restrictions may need to be added to how large a raft can be built. There are so many directions that we could go with this concept, so we may need to actually put it on the back burner and focus on other aspects first. I still haven't even decided on which aspect to focus on more, building or combat, which makes these turrets also very uncertain. If we're going for a tower defense thing, these make sense. But if we're going for like a build and survive the environment, not so much. But we'll just have to wait and see how the project unfolds. And with that said, brings us to the end of today's episode of Dev Diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know which direction you'd like to see the project go. Should we do more of a base builder survival thing or more of a defensive action thing? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.